The thing I find most fascinating about First Folio copies is that they all tell their own story. There's a kind of biography to read in these books. So I'm not so interested in the perfect copy. There aren't very many perfect copies actually, but they used to be the ones that were most valuable. But actually, the ones that are most valuable are the ones where people have written in them, people have engaged with them and interacted with them in all kinds of different ways. So, for example, I really love the ones where they're now in valuable libraries. They're kept like treasures, but you can see there are stains from the foot of a wine glass, or you can see that there's food being spilt on it, or there's even a couple, one in Birmingham, where a cat or something has jumped over the pages. So these were books that used to be household objects. People just read them, children scribbled in them or used the spare pages for pen practice. You can see some doodles here in this copy. So I love that idea that you can see a whole social history of people who've cared about the book. They haven't cared about it as a relic or as a treasure or as an object to sell for a lot of money, although that's been its main role probably since the late 19th century, but they've cared about it as a book that sort of rubs along with them in their ordinary life. So my interest is exactly in the bits that spoil the book if you're interested in a perfect copy. There are lots of ways that the First Folios become a symbol. One of the ones that sticks in my mind is quite a recent one. The first night that the BBC filmed the National Lottery draw in the UK, they had all kinds of games for the audience which were about value and what was worth what. And one of the things they did, the presenter, Noel Edmonds, had a first folio and people had to guess how much it was worth. And there's some amazing footage of them. The people who owned it, the Shakespeare Birthplace Trust copy, must have been in the wings of the studio thinking, don't touch my book, don't touch my book. But they said, this is worth £1 million. And that was the sort of way of imagining what the lottery prize could be, which is so weird. I mean, nobody who won the lottery probably, maybe apart from me, would want to buy with it a Shakespeare First Folio. So it's been a real status symbol for lots of people. For my book, I decided that I would try and look at as many copies of the First Folio as I could. And I also decided to make it a bit more difficult for myself. So I could have looked at 82 copies just by sitting in one library, the Folio Shakespeare Library in Washington, DC. But I also felt, not just that that was too easy, but that was the collection which had actually been most closely scrutinised by scholars already because it was convenient and it was available to them. And what I thought that there were 2/3 of the other, the total number of folios that exist, 2/3 of them are scattered all over the place, and there's one, and you need to go and make an appointment and go and see it. And I thought that I would try and do that, and I would particularly look at copies which were still in the UK. And I also made a trip. I was lucky enough to make a trip to New Zealand, where there's a copy which you wouldn't expect, perhaps in Auckland, and to Japan, where which has become a really significant place in folio history, but only in the last 30 or 40 years, only since about the 1970s. So I was lucky enough to go around and look at these copies and try and understand what they meant to people in those contexts, why they were there, and what things they could tell us about the people who'd owned them and what kind of attitude they'd had to them.